a glass tower in downtown Charlotte, 42nd floor. Garrett Voss tossed a check for $50 onto the walnut table. For a patent no one will ever fund. Wesley Caldwell, in a faded blue flannel shirt, signed the assignment. His hand did not shake. Sloane Whitaker stood behind Garrett, blue eyes resting on Wesley a beat too long. Something did not match. Wesley took the check, gave her one small private smile, and walked out. 1 year later, the same patent would be valued at $300 million, and Garrett would be the only man on earth who no longer owned it. The morning fog still clung to the ridges above Asheville when Wesley pulled open the corrugated metal door of his shop. The place smelled like diesel and cut grass and the leather of old work gloves. A John Deere combine sat half undressed in the center bay, its harvester head pulled apart on a tarp. Wesley made his living here, fixing tractors and balers for the orchard families along the French Broad River. The farmers paid him in cash, in apples, in jars of honey, and sometimes in nothing at all when a season went bad. He liked it that way. He liked the weight of a wrench in his palm, and the small, clean satisfaction of an engine that fired on the first turn. He liked the way nothing in the shop pretended to be more than what it was. A little after 8, the side door creaked open. Mia came in carrying a tin lined with wax paper. She was 9 and small for her age, with her mother's brown hair and her mother's slow, careful eyes. "I made them last night," she said. "Heart ones. For Mr. Halverson, too, because he tipped me last week." Wesley wiped his hands on a shop rag, then on his jeans, then on the rag again, until they were as clean as they were going to get. He took one cookie. He chewed slowly. "Best in North Carolina," he said. He beamed, set the tin on his workbench beside the impact wrench, and ran back toward the house through the wet grass. He watched her go until the porch door clapped shut behind her. Then he listened a moment longer to make sure she had not turned around. Wesley sat down on the wheeled stool and opened the bottom drawer of the bench, the one with the false back. Under the rags he kept the latest issue of Nature Biotechnology, the corner of one page folded down. The article was about protein folding in pancreatic tissue. He had already read it twice. He had also already understood, on the first reading, that the authors had reached the wrong conclusion in the third paragraph, and were 3 years and one mistake away from realizing it. For a moment he was not in Asheville at all. He was 26 again, standing in a sun-bright lab at MIT, and Eleanor was at the glass wall writing equations in dry erase marker, her ponytail swinging when she laughed at something he had said. She had a smudge of green ink on her chin. "If this works," she said, "half to him and half to the molecule on the board, no one will have to die the way my mother did." He had looked at her the way men look at women they intend to spend the rest of their lives believing. The phone in his back pocket buzzed and pulled him back. An unknown Charlotte number. "Mr. Caldwell, this is Sloane Whitaker, counsel for Voss Biocapital. We need to meet about U.S. Patent 11-847-392. He was silent for the space of 3 breaths. "All right." Before she could speak again, he added, "Tell me, Miss Whitaker, does Garrett know I'm the one who filed it?" There was a pause on her end. He could hear, behind her, the soft murmur of a copy machine and the city air conditioning that whispers through every Charlotte high-rise in late summer. Then a careful, lawyered, "He has the documentation." That was not a yes. That night, Wesley stood in front of the bathroom mirror and shaved with care for the first time in a year. He buttoned a soft gray Oxford that smelled like cedar from the closet. He looked at himself a long time. In the mirror his eyes had gone quiet and very cold, and the mechanic was nowhere in them. The 38th floor of Whitaker and Pierce smelled like new carpet and old money. Wesley stepped out of the elevator at 9 in the morning and did not look at the receptionist twice. Garrett was already at the head of the conference table, sleeves rolled to his forearms, the way a man rolls them when he wants you to remember he used to do real work. Sloane sat on his right, a closed leather portfolio in front of her. Wesley did not extend his hand. "Mr. Caldwell," Garrett said, with a grin that did not reach the eyes. "Long time. I hear you're turning wrenches now. Honest work, good for you." Wesley took the chair across from him. He looked once at Sloane, only once. She felt it land. "Let's keep it short," Garrett said. He slid a single page across the walnut. $50. Clean transfer. The patent is theoretical garbage. No commercial pathway. I'm doing you a favor taking the maintenance fees off your hands." Sloane's pen stopped moving above her legal pad. She had read the file the night before, twice. She had read the citations, the cross-references, the foundational chemistry. She knew the patent was not garbage. She knew it was a key. She opened her mouth. Garrett did not look at her. "Sign or don't, Caldwell. I have lunch." Wesley signed. He folded the check. He stood. At the door, he paused and finally looked at Garrett. And for 1/2 second, Garrett's smile slipped, because he had seen that look across a chessboard in a graduate dorm a very long time ago. Then it was gone, and Wesley was gone with it. Sloan caught him at the elevator. "Mr. Caldwell, may I ask you something off the record?" "You can ask." "Why?" He looked at her for a long, quiet moment. He had a steady mouth, and the kind of face that had stopped being handsome and become something better, something used. "Some debts aren't paid with money, Miss Whitaker." The elevator doors closed on him. She stood in the hallway with the carpet pattern blurring under her shoes. Back at her desk, she pulled his file from the bin to seal it for archive. Habit made her flip once through the personal sheet, and then her hand stopped. Doctor of Philosophy, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, 2009. MacArthur Fellowship nominee, 2011. Co-author, with Eleanor R. Caldwell, of a paper in Cell on substrate binding pancreatic enzymes. She knew that paper. Every patent attorney in biotech knew that paper. It was the foundational work that all of Voss Biocapital was built on. Her hands went cold from the wrists down. She walked to Garrett's office. "You said he was a hobbyist." Garrett did not look up from his screen. "Old story. He gave up. I built the empire." "Why are we still talking about it?" His eyes were on the screen, but they were not moving. That night, in a cabin 200 miles west, Wesley sat on the edge of Mia's bed and brushed the hair back from her forehead while she slept. The nightlight made a soft yellow circle on the quilt. "Mom would have been proud today, baby," he whispered. He sat there a long time without moving. In Charlotte, Sloan was still at her desk at 2 in the morning. The office was dark except for her lamp. She had typed Wesley Caldwell MIT 2008 into the search bar and not stopped reading since. Old conference abstracts, a faculty page that had been quietly scrubbed. A nominating letter, archived by a third party, that called him one of the most original minds of his generation. Her face changed, slowly, from curiosity to something much harder. She closed the laptop. "Oh my God, Garrett," she said to the empty room. "What did you do?" The drive from Charlotte to Asheville took 3 hours, and Sloan Whitaker did it on a Tuesday afternoon 2 weeks later, in a navy suit she had not bothered to change out of. She had not called ahead. The shop sat off a county road behind a row of mailboxes and a hand-painted sign that just said, "Caldwell Repair." She parked beside an old red pickup and walked through the open bay. Wesley was on his back under a John Deere 490 combine, only his boots and his forearms visible. He slid out when he heard her heels on the concrete and did not seem the least bit surprised. He stood, wiped his hands on a rag, and walked to the coffee pot. "Black, okay?" "Yes." He poured it into a paper cup, the kind from a service station, and handed it to her without comment. She took a sip. It was strong, and a little burned and oddly perfect. "Why?" she said. He raised an eyebrow. "Why did you let him have it for $50 when it's worth 9 figures? He set down his own cup, looked at her for a long beat, and tipped his head toward the back of the shop. "Walk with me." Behind the building, in a small clearing the orchard had eaten back around, stood a greenhouse the size of a tool shed. Inside it, in neat clay pots, were dahlias in every color a dahlia comes in: pink, copper, deep wine red, Eleanor's favorite flower. He stopped in the doorway and let her see them. "He took something from me once," Wesley said. "I'm letting him take it again, so he can't claim later that I refused to share." Sloan studied his profile. She was beginning to understand that he was not a man who was being robbed. He was a man who was setting a table. "What are you really doing, Wesley?" It was the first time she had used his given name. He noticed. He turned and looked at her, and the corner of his mouth did the smallest thing. "I'm letting him build the cage himself." She did not have time to answer because the screen door of the cabin banged open, and a small girl with grass stains on her knees came barreling around the corner of the greenhouse. An orange cat held precariously under one arm. The cat made a sound of protest. The girl set him down. She stopped short when she saw Sloan. "Hi," she said very politely. "Hi." The girl tilted her head. Then she walked into the greenhouse, picked a single small dahlia, the white one with a pink center, and held it out. "You can have this one." Sloan took the flower from a 9-year-old in a hand-knit cardigan, and for a moment she could not speak. It had been a long time since anyone had given her flowers. and longer since one had been given by someone who had nothing to gain. "Thank you," she said. Wesley watched the whole exchange and said nothing at all. On the drive back to Charlotte that evening, with the dahlia laid carefully on the passenger seat in a paper cup of water, Sloane called her assistant. "Reassign everything related to Voss Biocapital. 3 months. Conflict of interest. I'll explain later." She hung up. She did not entirely know why she had done that, or she did. She just was not ready to say it out loud. 4 weeks passed. Voss Biocapital made the announcement on a Monday morning, with a press conference at the Ritz and a banner across the homepage. A breakthrough acquisition, a patented mechanism that would allow next-generation delivery of pancreatic-targeted compounds. The stock opened up 19% and kept climbing. By Friday, Garrett was on the cover of Forbes in a slate-gray suit with his arms crossed, jaw lifted, the word visionary printed below his chin. Sloane watched the news from a rented studio on the second floor of a converted Asheville cotton mill. She had taken a month of leave from the firm. She told the partners she needed a quiet stretch. She told herself the same thing. The studio had a single window, brick walls, an iron radiator that ticked at night. She liked the ticking. She had not liked silence in a long time. She began stopping by the shop in the afternoons. She brought turkey sandwiches from a place on Lexington Avenue. They ate them on the wooden steps that led up to the cabin porch. They did not talk much. They did not need to. The mountains did most of the talking, and the wind in the high pines above the orchard did the rest. Sometimes Mia sat on the lower step and read a chapter book aloud to no one in particular, and Wesley would lean back on his elbows and listen, and Sloane would forget for whole minutes at a time that she was supposed to be a person with a job in Charlotte. On a Thursday, after she had been coming by for 9 days, Wesley wiped his hands and said, "Come see something." He led her past the greenhouse to a small post and beam barn she had taken for storage. He unlocked it with a key on a leather lanyard. Inside, in a clean wood-floored room, was a lab, modest, a benchtop centrifuge, an old microscope under a fitted cloth, a row of 3-ring binders on a steel shelf, every spine labeled in careful handwriting. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and pine. A small framed photograph sat on the shelf beside the binders, face turned slightly away from the door, where only someone who already knew it was there would see it. She turned slowly in the middle of the room. "Wesley, the patent Garrett bought," he said, "is one piece. There are 14. He owns the first. I own the other 13. They're held by a Delaware shell. Filed clean, maintained on time. The application methods, the delivery vehicle, the manufacturing process. All 13. She did the math in her head and started to laugh, low and stunned, and then she stopped laughing because she understood. "His patent doesn't work without your 13. It doesn't, and you'll never sell them to him." "I won't. He's been telling shareholders for a month that he can move to production by Q2. He can't. He won't. Not on any timeline that matters. Every quarter he tries, he gets further into the hole." She sat down on a wooden stool. She put her hand over her mouth. She was not a woman who put her hand over her mouth. She had not done it since law school. Wesley walked to the shelf and pulled down a binder. He held it for a moment without opening it. The label on the spine, in the same careful handwriting as the others, read simply Eleanor Volume 1. "Eleanor designed 12 of those 13, he said. "I just kept them safe." The barn went quiet. Outside, very faintly, a wind chime moved. The screen door of the cabin slammed across the yard, and Mia's voice carried clear over the grass. "Daddy, is the lady staying for supper?" He did not answer right away. He looked at Sloane. Sloane hesitated. There was a moment when she could have left, when she could have driven back down the mountain and made a call and chalked it up to a strange professional curiosity. The moment passed. Then she nodded once. Wesley turned his face toward the door. "Set a third plate, baby." He did not look at Sloane when he said it, but the corner of his mouth did that small thing again. She brought it up on the porch the next evening, after supper, while Mia chased a firefly in the long grass. "You're going to need help," she said. "Not from your firm. From me. Personally. I know how Garrett's lawyers think because I trained 2 of them." Wesley was quiet a long time. He was a man who had lived alone in his own head for 4 years, and was not used to letting anyone in. "All right," he said, "but there's someone you need to meet first." They drove up to Boone the next morning. The Blue Ridge Parkway was empty, the leaves only beginning to turn. They took the curve slowly. Sloane drove. Wesley watched the road. Dr. Harlan Pike's cabin sat at the end of a gravel switchback. He was 67, broad-shouldered once, narrower now. His hand shook when he opened the door, the small, steady tremor of early Parkinson's. He embraced Wesley without a word. He made them tea in a chipped white pot. "You should have come to me sooner," he said, not to Wesley but to the table. He sat down across from Sloane and looked at her over the rim of his cup. "Miss Whitaker, what I am about to tell you, I should have said in 2008. He spoke for an hour. In the fall of 2008, Garrett Voss had been a senior doctoral candidate in the same MIT lab as Wesley. Their advisor was Pike. Wesley had been engaged to Eleanor for 6 weeks. They were planning a small wedding for the spring. One night, Garrett let himself into the office. Wesley and Pike shared and photographed 63 pages of Wesley's draft dissertation. 2 weeks later, he submitted a paper, under his sole name, to a journal in Boston, with a filing date stamp that beat Wesley's by 11 days. When Wesley confronted him, Garrett had a smile and a family lawyer and a settlement offer that came wrapped in the words, "Your wedding next spring and your young wife." Wesley let it go. He and Eleanor pivoted their research the next morning. They built a new direction from scratch, slower, harder, deeper. 14 patents over 13 years, the last filed 3 weeks before her diagnosis. Pike had known all of it. He had kept, in a safe behind the bookcase in his cabin, the original draft dissertation, with the dated print stamp from the department's secure plotter, plus the lab logbook entries that placed Garrett in the office that night. He had said nothing for 15 years. He went to the bookcase now and took down a small fireproof box, and from the box a USB drive. "It's time," he said. "I'm dying anyway." Slowly, but his hand was shaking when he laid the drive on the table. Sloane picked it up. Her own fingers were not entirely steady. Wesley walked around the table and put a hand on his old advisor's shoulder. One squeeze. He did not speak. Pike closed his eyes. They drove back down the mountain after dark. Sloane drove again. Wesley was quiet for the first hour, his face turned to the window, where the black pine tree line ran beside them. Then she said it without planning to. "He didn't just steal your work, Wesley. He stole 15 years of your life." He did not turn from the window. "No," he said softly. "He stole the years before Eleanor died. The years after, those were mine." She had no answer to that. A few miles later, at a four-way stop with the blinker ticking in the silence, she let her hand drop from the wheel to the gear shift and laid her fingertips lightly across the back of his hand. He did not move his hand away. They drove home like that for 30 miles, the gear shift between them, neither of them speaking, neither of them pretending it was nothing. A month passed. Sloane built the case. She slept 4 hours a night. She moved her clothes into a single drawer of a dresser in the rented studio and stopped flying back to Charlotte on weekends. Wesley brought her coffee in paper cups and stayed up with her reading the timelines and the affidavits. They worked at the kitchen table after Mia went to bed. He learned how she annotated. She learned how he thought. The product launch was at the Charlotte Ritz on a Friday in October. Voss Biocapital had taken over the entire ballroom. The chandeliers had been re-rigged. The trade press came in cocktail dresses. The stock closed that afternoon at an all-time high. Sloane and Wesley arrived together, late on purpose. She wore a plain black skirt and a white silk blouse, no jewelry. He wore a navy suit jacket over a white shirt, no tie. In a room full of $2,000 dresses, they read like the catering staff, and people looked at them twice for it. Garrett saw them from the dais. His face went tight for 1 second. Then he smiled, lifted his glass, and worked the room toward them. "Wesley," he said, loud enough for the cameras nearby to catch it, "I'd love to recognize the original inventor. Come up. Say a few words. The world should know your name." It was a public mocking, delivered in a tuxedo. Wesley accepted. He walked to the dais. He took the microphone. He did not look at Garrett. "Thank you," he said into the mic. "I won't take long. I'd like to introduce someone." He gestured to the back of the ballroom. A woman in her late 40s, in a navy blazer that did not quite fit at the shoulders, walked through the crowd. People moved aside without knowing why. She climbed the 3 steps to the stage. Her hands were shaking, but her jaw was set. Garrett's drink stopped halfway to his mouth. "Cassandra," he said, very low. Cassandra Voss took the microphone from her brother's hand. She had been chief financial officer of Voss Biocapital for 12 years. She was 49 years old. She unfolded a single sheet of paper. "From 2009 to 2023, she said, her voice carrying surprisingly well, My brother Garrett Voss admitted to me, in writing, more than 40 separate times that, quote, the foundation work isn't ours. I have kept every email. I have a notarized copy with counsel as of last week. I'm tired. I'm done. The room did not gasp. It went still, which was worse. She handed the microphone back to Wesley. I'm sorry, Mr. Caldwell, she said. For all of it, for my whole life. She walked off the dais and out the side door without stopping. Then the room did erupt. Phones came up. A woman from CNBC shouted a question. Garrett's smile cracked into something ugly. He lunged for the microphone, and one of his own security men, on instinct or on relief, put a hand on his chest and steered him toward the wings. Wesley stepped off the dais. Sloan was waiting at the bottom of the steps. They did not embrace. They stood beside each other, shoulder to shoulder, his arm just touching hers through the fabric of his jacket. It's done, he said quietly. She shook her head, eyes still on the stage door where Cassandra had gone. No, she said. It's just begun. For you. The market opened on Monday at 9:30 Eastern. Voss Biocapital was halted within 4 minutes. When trading resumed, it had dropped 37%. By noon, the SEC had announced an inquiry. By 3, the board had requested an emergency session, and 2 of the firm's largest institutional shareholders had issued public statements about loss of confidence. By the end of the week, Sloan Whitaker filed in the United States District Court for the Western District of North Carolina, naming Garrett Voss personally as defendant. Counts of intellectual property fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and misappropriation of trade secrets. The prayer for relief asked for $300 million in damages, the exact market valuation of the patent. Garrett tried to settle. He sent a partner from a New York firm as a back channel. The offer was $50 million and a non-disclosure. The number was chosen, Sloan understood, to be exactly 1 million times the original purchase price, as some kind of grim joke he expected Wesley to appreciate. Wesley said no through Sloan in a single sentence. The preliminary hearing was held in Asheville 2 weeks later. The courtroom was small and unfussy, the carpet the color of wet leaves, the wooden bench worn smooth by 40 years of plaintiffs and defendants. Sloan stood at the petitioner's table in a charcoal suit, with her hair pulled back. She did not raise her voice once. She laid out the timeline. The 2008 draft, with the dated department print stamp. Dr. Pike's notarized affidavit. Cassandra's 43 emails, printed in tabbed binders thick as bricks. The Delaware filings of the 13 related patents, in Wesley's name, with priority dates spanning 12 years. She spoke for 40 minutes. Her voice was as steady as a metronome. The judge, a heavy-set woman in her 60s named Margaret Owen, looked over her reading glasses 3 times in the first 10 minutes, and not again after that. Wesley sat in the first row of the gallery. He watched her the entire time. Whatever was in his face was past gratitude. When Sloan sat down, Garrett's lead counsel rose and made objections for 19 minutes. Judge Owen overruled most of them inside the first 9. By the end, she was simply waving her hand. The judge issued findings inside 3 days. Garrett's assets were frozen pending trial. The Voss Biocapital board met that afternoon and voted 11-1 to remove him as chief executive. The lone dissenting vote was a cousin, who was removed from the board the following Tuesday. The court ordered the original patent restored to Wesley Caldwell in full, along with full licensing authority over the 13 related patents. The verdict on the preliminary motions came in on a Thursday afternoon, and it was raining lightly when Wesley walked down the courthouse steps. The rain made the stone treads dark and slick. A flag whipped wetly on the pole near the curb. The press had massed at the bottom. Microphones extended. Questions overlapped. A young man in a cheap blue tie shouted something about a comment on the historic damages. Wesley did not answer any of them. He scanned the crowd until he found her. Sloan was on the edge of the curb, helping a young reporter from the local paper fold an unwieldy yellow rain poncho over her camera bag. She was not even watching the cameras anymore. She was tucking the poncho in at the corner so the rain would not get to the lens. She looked up and met his eyes. In that 1 second, something passed between them that the cameras did not catch and would not have understood. This was no longer about the money. It was no longer about Garrett. It was about 2 people who had found each other inside the rubble. They walked together toward her car, past the line of microphones, past the reporters, past a TV truck idling at the curb with its antenna up. They did not speak. They did not hold hands. Their footsteps fell in time without trying. A week after the ruling, the first wire transfer landed. $42 million from the frozen accounts, released under the preliminary order. Wesley did not look at the balance for 2 days. When he finally did, he wrote down the number on a piece of scrap paper, folded it, put it in his shirt pocket, and forgot about it until the shirt went into the laundry. On the third evening, he drove to Sloane's studio on the second floor of the old cotton mill. He carried a small wooden box under one arm. The box had been Eleanor's. He had not opened it since the week of the funeral. She opened the door in a sweatshirt with the sleeves pulled over her hands. He set the box on her kitchen table and opened it. Inside was a leather-bound notebook, brown, the edges soft from use. He turned the pages slowly. Equations in a careful slanted hand. Diagrams of enzyme pockets. Tiny notations in margins, in a second color of ink. Some pages had small flecks of dried coffee. One had the faint round print of a tea mug. He stopped at a page near the back and laid his finger beside one line of marginalia. He read it aloud. For Wes. When you're ready to share this with the world. He made it to the end of the sentence, and his voice broke once on the last word. Sloane did not say anything. She got him a glass of water from the tap. She sat down beside him on the bench at her small kitchen table, close enough that their shoulders touched. She did not look at him. She let him have the few seconds he needed. After a long while, he spoke again, very quietly. I want to build the foundation she always wanted. Free pancreatic cancer treatment access for families that can't pay. Asheville first, then the Carolinas, then everywhere. Sloane reached across the wood and put her hand over his. Not a passing brush of fingertips this time. Her whole hand, deliberately, over his. Then let me help you build it. He turned his palm up beneath hers, slowly, and curled his fingers around her hand. They sat like that for a long time without speaking. The radiator ticked in the wall. 2 days later, at the cabin, Mia sat at the dining table with a fan of crayons spread out around her like a small explosion of color. She was working on something with a great deal of concentration, her tongue poking out at the corner of her mouth. When Sloane came in for supper, Mia slid the drawing toward her with both hands. It was 3 figures, holding hands, standing in front of a cabin with a green roof. A tall man in a flannel shirt, a small girl in red boots, and, on the man's other side, a woman with long hair and blue eyes. Sloane looked at it for a long time. She did not cry, but she folded the paper carefully along the center crease, twice, and slid it into the inner pocket of her wallet against her chest. Mia watched her do it. Mia did not say anything either, but she sat up a little straighter in her chair. Later that night, after she had gone back to the studio, her phone lit up on the nightstand. It was a message from a federal detention facility in eastern North Carolina. You'll regret choosing him. She read it twice. She smiled, just at one corner of her mouth. She turned the phone face down on the nightstand and walked to the window. 2 blocks away, through the bare maple branches, the porch light at the Caldwell cabin was still on. 6 months later, on the first Saturday of May, the Eleanor Caldwell Foundation opened its doors in a renovated brick building on Patton Avenue in downtown Asheville. Wesley had committed $210 million from the settlement to fund it. Sloane was its lead counsel and had refused to take a salary. She had drafted the bylaws herself, longhand on yellow legal pads. Late at night at the kitchen table in the cabin while Wesley made coffee, the first 30 patients had already been enrolled, all of them from families that made less than the county median income. The clinical director was a woman from Duke who had cried when she first read the mission statement. The ribbon cutting was small. No red carpet, no long speeches. Wesley had rejected 3 different press packets the foundation's communications consultant had proposed, and the consultant had eventually stopped offering them. Wesley cut the ribbon with Mia. She carried a bundle of dahlias from the greenhouse, an armful so big she could barely see over the top of it. The cameras of 3 local affiliates clicked softly. She giggled into the flowers, then peeked out at her father, then ducked back behind them. Dr. Pike came in a wheelchair pushed by a younger nephew. His hand shook badly now, almost continuously. When Wesley bent to embrace him, Pike held on for a long moment. I should have spoken sooner. You spoke when it mattered, sir. Cassandra Voss came too, in a plain gray coat, standing at the back of the small crowd. She had cooperated fully with federal investigators and been granted immunity from prosecution. Wesley walked the length of the room and held out his hand. He did not say anything. She took it. She cried. Then she nodded. Then she let go. She left without speaking to anyone else. and Wesley watched her walk to the corner and turn onto Lexington and disappear. Garrett was being held in a federal facility outside Raleigh, awaiting trial on charges that carried a sentencing range of 7 to 12 years. That evening, after the foundation closed and the catering had been packed away, Wesley and Sloane sat on the cabin porch. Mia had fallen asleep on the couch with her crayons still in her hand. The porch light made a small yellow halo on the boards. 2 mugs of tea cooled on the railing between them. Neither of them drank from theirs. "I came up here for a month," Sloane said. "It's been 7. I noticed." The crickets were loud. Somewhere up the ridge an owl spoke once and went quiet. A truck went by far down the county road and was gone. She let her head settle, very lightly, against his shoulder. He did not turn. He did not lift his arm, but his breathing slowed by 1 beat and stayed there. The camera, if there had been one, would have pulled back then, very slowly, across the wide dark yard, past the orchard line, into the cold high pines of the Blue Ridge, until the 2 figures on the porch were just a small warm pair of shapes inside a small warm pocket of light. Nobody said anything else. Nobody needed to. 1 year after Wesley Caldwell sold a patent for $50, it was an autumn morning in Asheville, and the maples along the ridge had gone the color of struck copper. Wesley was on his knees in the side garden, teaching Mia how to set dahlia tubers into the cold earth for the spring. She had dirt on her cheek and a serious 9-year-old's face on. She kept asking him whether the eye was supposed to face up or sideways, and he kept telling her, with great patience, that it was supposed to face up. Sloane came out of the cabin with 3 mugs of hot chocolate on a wooden tray and set them on the back step. She had given notice at Whitaker and Pierce in March. She had opened a small office above a bakery on Lexington Avenue, 3 rooms and a window box. The shingle on the door said Caldwell Counsell in small black letters. The Caldwell was not her surname. She did not explain it to anyone who asked, and after a while people stopped asking. She represented independent inventors, mostly people who had been offered $50 for something worth more. She charged most of them nothing. The bakery downstairs sent up bread on Fridays. Inside the shop, on the wall above Wesley's workbench, was a new framed photograph. 3 people in front of the foundation building on opening day, Mia in the middle holding her flowers. He had hung it there the week after the opening, beside an older frame of the same exact size. The older frame held a photograph of Eleanor in a sunbright lab, half laughing, green ink on her chin. 2 frames, the same wood, side by side. That afternoon, the work done, Wesley led Sloane out to the back of the property, past the greenhouse, to the barn with the lab. He took a small brass key from his pocket and laid it in her open palm. He did not say anything. She understood. She had understood for some weeks. She closed her hand slowly around the key and held it for a long second before she slipped it onto the ring with the others, beside her own house key and the key to her office above the bakery. Mia came running across the yard then, her boots loud on the dry leaves. "Daddy, Sloane, supper." She caught each of them by one hand and tugged. They followed her in. On the kitchen table she had set out a plate of heart-shaped cookies under wax paper. There were 3 this time, not 2. She had arranged them carefully, with the slightly burned one on the bottom of the stack so no one would see it. After supper, Wesley washed the dishes and Sloane dried them. Mia sat at the table with her crayons, humming a song that did not have a tune yet. The wind moved through the high pines outside the window, and the cabin smelled like clean dish soap and wood smoke. Somewhere a screen door clicked softly. He had sold a patent for $50 to a man who thought he was buying everything. But the things that mattered, a daughter's laughter, a woman's hand in his, a wife's dream made real, had never been for sale. Neither of them had been looking, and somehow, that was exactly why it found them. The kitchen light went out. The porch light stayed on.